Now in today's video we're going to be turning this old office PC into a cheap gaming PC. It is still something that you can do if you want to get into PC gaming on the cheap, but many people out there that show you how to do this generally just say throw a graphics card in and away you go. It's actually a little bit more complex than that, particularly if you're using a pre-build like this. So hopefully today we can go through the process of how you would do this properly and you'll learn some tips and tricks. So for those of you with a keen eye, you'll recognize this kind of system. We actually recently did a video where we built a gaming PC, a whole gaming PC for just £20, and we actually used a case from one of these. That video, or that case in particular, actually inspired me to go out and see what you would actually get inside a Lenovo E72, which is what it's from. And to be honest, it's not a great system. There is a broad range of components that you can actually get into these, particularly the different versions and models and stuff that they do. Most of them that I found online actually had older Pentium processors, but I managed to pick this whole system up for around £22 on eBay, and it's actually not one of those old Pentiums. It's actually got something pretty decent in it. Most of the system is actually quite useless, to be honest. We've got an absolute terrible power supply here that has barely got enough connections for what's in the system itself. It is also a very low watt power supply, so you're not going to run anything kind of major off that. And it also doesn't come with any kind of extra PCI Express connections, so upgrading with this power supply in it is very, very difficult. It also has an operating system running on a hard drive, which we do not want to experience again. It was terrible on the last system we built, so that of course is something that you would need to change in this. And it also has a terrible set of memory in here, which is only about 4 GB, but there is a bit of a saving grace here because underneath this cooler is not your typical Pentium processor. It is actually a second generation i7 processor. Now, of course, the second generation i7 processor is not great anymore. Most people will have written them off or thrown them out nowadays, but it does actually give you the ability to play games because they do seem to perform quite well, particularly with older titles. And fortunately for us, having one in this system actually gives us a decent base to be able to build off. Of course, this system doesn't have any graphics card in it, so it's actually been running off the onboard, which is probably fine for an office PC. In actual fact, if you were to buy this PC back when it was actually created, it probably cost an absolute fortune for somebody, particularly to run spreadsheets and things in an office. It is a little bit of a weird combination, only having 4 GB of RAM, but that was probably pretty big back then. And of course, the CPU with its built-in graphics are not that good at gaming. We actually did a little bit of testing of gaming on this system, particularly with the hard drive in, and it took a while to be able to get to do it. And unfortunately, you are going to struggle to even run some of the simplest stuff. In Half-Life 2, you're going to struggle to manage to get around 30 FPS in 1080p. Okay, that is with a high setting, but the game usually runs beautiful on most things, and you could get away with it, but it's not the best experience. And then of course, if you were to try something, even an older game like Tomb Raider from 2013, you're going to struggle to get around 20 FPS even in a low setting with that game, and the experience is going to be terrible. Now we of course need to upgrade this system to be able to get those games to play better, and I think we can actually do it quite well, but we're going to have to change a lot of the things. The first thing that I'm going to do though is actually tear this system down. This case in particular is very thin. If we actually just look at the front here, it's not a wide case at all, so being able to get things in and out, particularly like power supplies and stuff like that, is really, really difficult. I found that out on the last one that I used because I actually built the system into it and then tried to install things like the power supplies, and it didn't go well at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to tear this system down, take all the components out that we don't want anymore, we'll chuck them away, build up the motherboard with some new components, and we'll go through the process of doing that, and then we'll put it all back together again and see how well it games. Now that we've got the system torn down, we can kind of see all the components we've got here. The first thing that we're going to be ditching is of course this power supply. Being only 180 watt, it's not great for what we want to do in it. It is loud, it is a tiny little unit, but it's noisy, it doesn't have enough connections, and it looks absolutely terrible. So we're going to be ditching that, and instead we're going to be swapping it out for one of these. Now you could use any power supply you want here. This is just one that I had on hand in the studio. It is a 550 watt gold rated power supply by Cooler Master, and it is a fully modular power supply. The reason that I want a fully modular one is because I just want to reduce the amount of cables in this case to extend for airflow and things like that, because there's not going to be great anyway due to the way that the case is designed, and I want to reduce the amount of cables to be able to actually get things cable managed. You can pick up fully modular power supplies from a cheaper brand, something like Game Max, for around £50 nowadays, so they're not costing that too much, particularly for a 550 watts, but this is the one that we're going to go for, and it's going to look great in the case, so we'll just throw that in. Now with the PSU installed, of course we needed to do a little bit of extra work on the case itself before we get to the motherboard, and that was to improve the cooling. One of the things that people miss when they actually do this kind of upgrade on these kind of systems is that you do need to also increase your cooling, particularly if you're going to put an external or a dedicated graphics card in there. This box could get quite hot, and they didn't really provide a lot back when this was created. They do only actually provide on this system a slot at the back for a 92mm fan, and we've installed one of them. It actually came from our friends at Arctic, who sent it along so that we could actually get this system up and running. They also sent us across a CPU cooler. This one is the Freezer 7X, and it is something that you would actually need for a system like this because the case is actually quite shallow, but unfortunately this won't fit our motherboard. If we try to install this on the motherboard, the little clip system that it comes with actually just comes straight out. It's actually designed very well for proper motherboards that are not proprietary, but for some reason they made the holes on this motherboard slightly too big for the clip system on this. At some point, I think what I will do is try to jerry-rig something up to get it to work, because I really do want to actually use this cooler on this system, but for now we're going to be sticking with the stock one. There is also no place in the front of this case for any kind of case fans. They haven't actually provided anything. There is a nice vented panel there, particularly through the front plastic as well as the inside, but there's no way of actually mounting a fan onto it. In reality, what I would tend to do is probably just cut a hole in the front and mount a fan, but for now I don't want to actually modify all that kind of stuff. I want to keep it as original as possible because it does have the nice little cool little speaker built into there, as well as the front I/O stuff, which is quite proprietary to that motherboard. So we're going to leave all of that, and we're going to of course use this one 92mm fan at the back. It will have its own fan header because this motherboard actually comes with 3 fan headers. It comes with 2 case fan headers, one at the front here, one at the back here, which is where we're going to plug that fan into, as well as one there for the CPU fan. It's not going to look great, but like I say, hopefully I can jerry-rig something up later for that tower cooler, because I think that's going to look and work way better. This actually brings us onto the motherboard itself. There is a lot of work that we need to do on this motherboard because the specifications of this system are not great. We are of course leaving the CPU with that i7, but we do need to upgrade things like the RAM. Inside of here we only have 2 2GB sticks of DDR3, and it is absolutely terrible. When we were doing our previous testing, just navigating Windows was horrendous, and that was all down to this 4GB of RAM and of course that hard drive. Even when things had actually eventually loaded up, because of the hard drive, most of the time it wouldn't actually display. There was just a blank screen, and Steam was a good example of that. As soon as you got it loaded up, it was actually blank, and what we had to do is actually go through the folder structure on the hard drive and start the games manually because we couldn't see them in Steam. So we're of course ditching that 4GB of RAM, and we're going to be installing a lot more RAM. This is actually 16GB, 2 8GB sticks of DDR3. That is really going to speed this system up. It is a nice matched pair of Crucial DDR3. It is of course the green stick stuff, so it's not the sexiest looking, but it's going to work perfectly fine in this system, and hopefully it will just really give it the boost that's needed. What we need to do now is actually install the motherboard into the case, do a little bit of cable management, get all the other stuff on there. There is a number of other things that we're throwing away here. This is an adapter onto the motherboard for an old COM port. You could keep that installed if you really want to, but I don't think there's any use for it anymore. And then of course it came with this inserted parallel port that will again still work from the motherboard, but I don't think there's any reason that anybody would need one of these anymore, so we're going to ditch it, save on a bit of cable management. But apart from that, let's just get the motherboard back into the case. With the motherboard in and connected, there is of course 2 more things that we need to do on this system. One is storage, and there is no way that we're actually putting this old hard drive back in. It is way too slow to be an operating system drive. If you really wanted to, you could make it a secondary drive, but this is only a 250GB drive, so it's not as if it's mass storage. But maybe if you did just need that extra little space, you could get away with it. This motherboard's got plenty of SATA connections, so you could do that. But of course we're going to be installing an SSD. This is actually going to completely transform the system, probably more than any other upgrade here. Maybe not when it comes to gaming, of course a graphics card will do that, but for everything else this is going to make all of the difference. The problem with a system like this though is that it was only ever kitted up for hard drives, so these actually mount into the front here, and here you could actually fit up to 2, so the SSD won't actually install. What most people will actually do at this point is just throw it into the bottom of the case. We don't want to do that, or they'll just sticky back glue it somewhere into the case. You could do that if you really wanted to, but then it makes it more difficult to actually go and change it. So instead I've actually bought one of these. This is a 2.5-inch drive, which is one of these, converter to this size, the 3.5-inch drive. These are actually super useful and also super cheap, and you can take them with you wherever you go. They are simple kind of devices really that just expand one size to the other. As you can see in there, we've got a little connector. All we need to do is just simply drop our drive into it, slide it across like that. It should just click in just like that. Then we can actually screw our drive into the back there. That will actually hold the drive down. And then this can actually just slot into the system like a hard drive and install into the exact same place. This system is now looking pretty good. It's starting to actually come together. We've got everything pretty much in there apart from the last component. And that is the one that will actually turn it into a gaming PC. We of course need a discrete graphics card or a dedicated graphics card. And for this, you can pretty much pick anything that you want. Originally, I did want to install an RX 580 because I think that paired nicely with the i7 processor in there. There was no point going too big with something like this because you're just going to be wasting it. And you also don't want to go too low because if you do that, then you're wasting the CPU really. You might as well just have bought a Pentium or something like that. But I think we've actually got something that's a reasonably good mix and something that will actually fit inside the case. The graphics card that we're going to be using in this is our little Zotac GTX 970. It is a 4GB card, or 3.5GB that most people will actually say. It does come with two 6-pin connections, which we do now have off of our 550 watt power supply, and it should fit in this case perfectly fine. So all we need to do is actually get this card installed, get it all connected up. We'll do a little bit of cable management and then we'll test to see if it game. I'm pretty sure that this system will actually game now, and I think it's going to game perfectly fine, but let's just go check it out. So the system is all up and running, and I think I did a pretty good job. It actually is a nice tidy build now. Could do with a little bit more cable management, but like I say, it's much better to have the hard drive kind of mounted like this with some kind of adapter than just hanging around in there, because that's just going to cause more mess. It has got a nice little quiet Arctic fan on the back now, which is drawing quite a little bit of air out, even though we don't have the side on. I would have loved to have, of course, upgraded that CPU cooler, and I'm sure we'll do that again at some other point. But when we're actually in Windows, it's a much better experience. Just getting rid of that hard drive and upgrading that memory to 16GB has really made a pretty snappy system. I'm actually quite impressed with the second gen i7 processor. It's reasonably good, to be honest, particularly for Windows activities. There is nothing that it can't do. It's obviously a little bit better than an i5 would have been back in the day, and people would have really wanted this CPU. I mean, it would have been pretty much a top-end CPU apart from the K variant. So somebody would have paid a pretty penny for this system back then just to sit in an office and do spreadsheets. But of course, we're going to want a game on it. So we've installed some stuff on it and see what that 970 can actually do. The first game that we're going to test is, of course, Tomb Raider. We're going to retest that because we originally did it with just the built-in graphics and it was absolutely terrible, if you remember. So let's kickstart that game, see what kind of configuration we can configure it to, and see what kind of performance we get. Now we're in the game, and of course we are getting a much better performance here. We're all the way up to around 155 frames per second, but we'll head over to the settings and see what we've currently got configured. We'll go to the, not the gameplay settings, we want to go to the graphics options, so we'll head into there. We are running in a 1080p resolution, and under our advanced tab here, we've got a high quality preset. I think we could actually boost that up to ultra here, considering the performance that we're getting in the corner, and we'll apply that and get back into the game. With the ultra graphics preset enabled, we're still getting around 110, 109 frames per second. And that is even in the rain on this bit of the game. This is actually one of the most demanding pieces of this, particularly when it comes to CPU utilization, as we saw in previous systems that we built on a very tight budget. They were absolutely terrible in this kind of game. But because this game is actually doing so well at the moment, I think what we'll do is we'll actually up the stakes a little bit and we'll try a game that's a little bit more demanding than this, a little bit more newer. And that game is Doom Eternal. I absolutely love this game still. It was produced back in 2019, so it's not a new release, but it's way newer than this actual system is, particularly in all the components inside this system. And it is reasonably easy to kind of play. It's a very good, well optimized game, and it always has been. So hopefully this system can perform okay in it. But what we'll do is we'll ramp some of the graphics details up, see how far we can actually push it. But to do that, of course, let's jump into game. Now, before we start measuring anything, let's head over to the settings and see what we've actually got configured. If we head to our video here, we are running in 1080p. I think all kind of testing today is going to be restricted to 1080p. And if we just scroll down to the bottom, we have a high quality preset. We'll see what that can actually produce. If we can get a 60 FPS gaming experience here, I think that's a pretty big win for this system, particularly on how much it would cost you to build, as well as what kind of age it is. But let's head back into the game. Resetting our stats here, we can see that the game looks absolutely gorgeous. This game always has done, and it tends to on a lot of hardware. But what is more important is that performance we're getting in the corner. We are currently getting an average of around 65, 66 frames per second. That is absolutely fantastic. But we are getting a 1% low of around 54. That is near a near 60 FPS experience here. So I think that is absolutely fantastic too. We'll just head on further into the game, see if we can get some things going on screen, and if we can, it should allow us to see what kind of performance we were getting. Obviously, jumping down into this action here, we can see that we had a slight little dip, but it's gone back up again, and it's actually performing exceptionally well. We're still getting an average of 53 frames per second on those 1% lows, with an average normal of 65 frames per second. That is, of course, going to give us a good, decent 60 FPS experience in this game. So this is an absolute win for this system. I can't believe that for a system that is this old and probably once just sat there doing spreadsheets in an office, can actually play games like Doom Eternal just like this, and you're going to have a good experience doing it. I think that this is doing so well at the moment that what we need to do, instead of trying to reconfigure this game, it's obviously going to play, it's going to play perfectly fine. What we'll do is we'll try something that's way more newer and something that's way more demanding, and we'll see if this system is even capable of it. Now, the next game is Cyberpunk 2077. When it was released, it was extremely demanding, and on a system like this, there was no way that you're actually going to play it perfectly fine. It has, though, had many updates as it's been released, and it seems to play reasonably well on some of the older hardware. I really don't know if this is going to play perfectly fine or not. I doubt very much that we're going to get a 60 FPS experience here, but maybe if we can just push it to that 30 FPS, get it into a more cinematic kind of gameplay and be smooth at that kind of performance, maybe it is a big win for the system. Maybe it does mean that people with something of this caliber can actually play modern games just like this. But the only way we're going to find out is obviously play the game. If we head over to the settings, we'll see what we've currently got configured. Under the graphics tab, we've currently got it set to custom. I do believe that that is low, so let's set it to low. We'll leave AMD FSR Super Resolution 2.1 on, but we're going to give it a balanced settings for now. We'll see if that can actually produce enough. I don't know what this game is going to look like in these settings. I don't generally test it in these kind of things, particularly with a system like this, but we'll apply those settings and we'll head back into game. Now, the game doesn't look that terrible, I will be honest, although we are getting a little bit of stuttering here as we're turning. Maybe that FSR isn't working as expected or as well as it should do, but we are currently getting an average of 51 frames per second with a 1% low of 33. I suppose that is giving us a 30 FPS experience here. I'm not quite sure if there's anything more that we can do. It is a very visually pleasing game, to be honest, and even in some of the lower settings it can look okay, but I'm not really too keen on that frame time graph there. It is going all over the place, so let's head back into the settings. Is there anything that we can actually do? We'll set our FSR2 down to a performance setting. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use anything like DLSS or anything like that on this aged system, but let's just tune that down a little bit, see what we can get. We have actually increased the 1% lows. Well, we did a little bit there, but the graphics quality has really taken a hit here. It's actually made it look like a 720p picture. So I don't think this is actually a game that you could really enjoy. I think it's playable, of course. Here we're now getting 46 frames per second. It seems worse now that we've actually changed that FSR. But maybe if we change the actual resolution itself down to 720p, it might actually become playable. So let's just drop it down to 720p. Maybe that is something you need to do if you've got a system like this, and we'll see how well that performs too. So actually dropping the resolution here has really given us a bad quality picture. It doesn't look great at all. Would you say this is playable? Maybe on an older console type experience, but we'll head over to the settings. We'll see what else is configured in there, see if there's anything else that we can do. We are now running, I think, at a medium preset. Let's drop that back down to low. Let's try and turn FSR off altogether. Let's stop it from upscaling anything. And let's see what kind of performance we get now. We'll just reset our stats here. So actually the quality just looks a lot better now that we've turned FSR off. It's probably causing the issue originally, but just 1080p without FSR on wasn't giving us any kind of performance. But I think we're actually getting a pretty decent performance now. We've currently got an average of 46 FPS with a 1% low of 25. The more we see on screen, of course, that little frame time graph is really jolting up and down here. So it's showing you that it's not the smoothest, but to be honest, I think you could actually get away with playing this. I have seen worse actually running from systems, and people do still play it like this, but of course 720p is probably the resolution to go for on this game. You're not really going to get much more out of it in 1080p, but you are getting a pretty decent average here of around 46 frames per second in 720, and that is obviously with a low setting and no FSR or upscaling enabled at all. So I'm actually surprised that this little system could even start Cyberpunk 2077, let alone get that kind of frame rate, but it does, and you can get around 41 frames per second on average. Although the 1% lows are a little bit low, it's not going to provide the best experience out there, but for somebody that is super wanting to play that game and this is all they've got, or this is all they can put together, you could probably get away with it. I actually really do love doing this kind of thing. I love taking little older systems like this, seeing what they could do before we actually do anything to them, and in this case it was really bad, you couldn't do anything much, and then of course adding a few parts to it as cheap as possible and seeing if you can get it to run. I also like to make sure that I do a proper job, and that's why I spend the extra on things like the adapters. I really will actually try to upgrade the cooler on this. I really want to get that tower cooler working, but I'm gonna have to jerry rig some kind of bracket on it just to get it working. I'm pretty sure if I dig through all the things that I've got and kind of dig out some old all-in-one cooler bracket or something, we can rig something up. If I do that, I'm sure I will share it on the community tab of our channel, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to catch that and follow us there. We do post some of the things that we actually are getting on in the background, so you'll be able to see that kind of stuff there. Don't forget to like the video if you like this kind of content, and I'm sure as always we'll catch you guys in the next one.